Hello and welcome to Coding with Stephen. Today I thought it'd be useful to give a short intro on a video series that we're going to be running through on the channel, which is building an API with Node, Express and Postgres. Now I thought it'd be useful to build something that was going to reflect how things look in the real world. So I thought we'd start with a user-based API, so something that's going to allow us to create users, possibly for like a service that you want to build later, create them, update them, delete them, and do a whole bunch of other stuff with them, but build things in such a way that it's going to reflect how you typically build something like this in the real world. So taking into account edge cases, validating user inputs, making sure passwords are minimum strengths, and handling authentication and authorization of access to particular resources like different users and things like that. So I thought it'd be useful just to go through what we'll be building, what technologies we're going to use, and hopefully give you a bit of an idea as to what you'll learn along the way. So in terms of what we'll build, so we'll build something that conforms to the REST standard, and it's going to contain a whole bunch of different routes, one being a route to create a user, update a user, delete a user, get the authenticated user, as well as routes to authenticate a user, and then some routes to handle password resets as well, so that it gives it the full kind of range of things that you would need a user-based API to do in the real world. In terms of technologies that we'll be using for this, we'll focus on Node and Express. So it's going to be a JavaScript-based API. And in terms of database, we'll make use of Postgres as well, so it'll give you a good introduction to SQL as well. Testing wise, we'll make use of the Jest framework, which is a framework developed by Facebook, and we'll make use of it for handling unit tests, which are tests for really small blocks of code, and we'll also use it for integration tests as well, which are more testing a system's functionality end to end, so that you can make sure that third-party integrations like accessing the database and things like that work as well. For validation, we'll make use of a library called Joy, which is a really popular validation library within JavaScript. I use it for most projects that I work on, just because it's so easy and simple to define a constraint for your validator and then process data through it and see which fields are failing or passing. In terms of the systems that we'll use, we'll make use of Docker Compose, which is a way of being able to define bits of infrastructure in a file and then use Docker to stand those bits of infrastructure up locally for you. It sounds more complicated than it is, but we'll use that to manage our database so that we can stand it up on your local machine and you'll be able to use it to store all the data that we need locally. And we'll also make use of NodeMon, which is a really helpful utility within a package, I guess, within JavaScript that allows you to restart your services whenever any code changes. So it's just a really useful thing, and it helps improve developer experience really when you're working on it, because as soon as you make a code change, it'll just restart all of your services and you'll be able to see those code changes in action. Now, in terms of things you'll learn, hopefully there'll be quite a lot that you'll be able to learn over the course of this project, but predominantly what we're looking for is how to stand up an application locally so that you can develop something on your local machine and see it all working without needing to deploy your application to the cloud or anything like that. Working with Docker Compose for local development, that's really useful if you want to stand up a local version of a database or some other services. So it just makes it really, really nice to be able to run everything locally on your machine. We'll aim for 100% test coverage for our unit tests, and we'll have integration tests for all of the core endpoints that we're going to be working on as well. And we'll deal with kind of real world scenarios when it comes to validating user input and making sure things like passwords and things like that meet the minimum requirements that we set. So the idea is that if we were to hand this to a user in a real environment, they could put whatever information they want in there, and the API will work. Even if they start putting in weird data or sending empty requests, things like that. So all of those kind of edge cases that perhaps you wouldn't think of learning, but we'll hopefully get that in here for you as well, so that you can see that it'll stand up to the test of a real world scenario. And in terms of helpful things to learn as well as we're going along, we'll build a lot of middleware for Express. Middleware is something that Express makes quite heavy use of, and you can build some really cool reusable bits of code that can sit in your middleware to handle common features. And we'll also build a lot of fixtures for our test framework, so that we're not rewriting things every time we're writing a new test case. So you'll see how you can rewrite something once and then reuse it multiple times within your test scenarios. And just by virtue of the way that I typically write my code, everything tends to have a very clear separation of concern. So things will be written into very small, manageable chunks of code with clear separations of functionality between areas of the code. So it's a good practice to get into, making sure that your functions aren't trying to do too much and trying to be too smart. So we'll write things in a really clean way that should be easy for you to understand as you go on. Now, what I would suggest doing is heading over to GitHub and creating a repository so that you can get started. Because what we'll do as we're working through the code is we'll commit our code up onto GitHub so that it's there, and we can make use of that as we're progressing through all of the different videos that form part of this series. So I hope that's been a useful introduction. I hope the topic sounds interesting. There'll be a playlist up for this video, so look out for the first video, which is going to be about setting up our project.